Hi, I am Tiffany Quirrell, and I will be presenting today for Chestnut Ridge School District on evaluating formal and informal culturally responsive and accessible assessment. So to start, I broke this down into 4 categories. So first we are going to understand what assessment is, and then how to avoid an ineffective classroom with ineffective assessment in it, as well as the well-being of all of our students, and then finally taking a look at our current CR board policies. So first we're going to understand assessment versus evaluation. So if you look at assessment and evaluation, they can be used interchangeably, but they are actually very different. So assessment is more showing the teacher and the student areas that they can improve upon. It can actually be broken down into 4 components. So assessment can first measure improvement of where they were previously. It can motivate the students to study as well, to make those improvements in progress. And it can also evaluate the teacher's methods to see how the teacher is doing during instruction. And then it can also rank students' capability, maybe by class or even by teacher, versus evaluation, which is just judgment based. So this is specifically based on a standard to see if they met the standards goal or not. That is definitely graded. So that is the product, that is the outcome of whatever tool you are using, versus assessment. This is the process of getting to that evaluation. So there are many different types of assessment that you can use in your classroom. Some are more effective for some students, as well as others are more effective depending on the teacher and the student needs, and as well as the curriculum and standard that you're looking at. So we have formative assessment. So this can assist in the learning process. This provides feedback to the learner, and it can allow the student to grow and improve for future. So an example of this would be giving comments on coursework. That would be considered a formative assessment. Then we have summative assessment. This in terms sums up the student's learning, but it does not allow for growth. It is like a final grade. Informal, that would be something that is tangible within a task or behavior that's done in class. It is usually less points. It is most of the time less threatening for the students, versus formal, which is more of a high stakes, high standards. This would be an example would be like a written assessment. A continuous assessment, this would occur for a longer period of time through the learning process. So maybe through a whole unit that you're teaching, maybe on, for an example, right now I'm teaching weather. So throughout the weather unit, I would continually assess them on their knowledge and their weather tools that they are using. We have final assessment. So this would be at the end of the learning process. So this would be like a unit test on weather. We have process assessment. So this is what occurs throughout a process. So this would be the steps to solve maybe a multi-step word problem, versus a product, which would just be the answer to that word problem. And then last we have divergent and convergent. Divergent would have more than one options as a correct answer, whereas convergent would be just a one correct answer. So that would be maybe like a multiple choice or fill in the blank examples. The reasons why assessment are important, there's a variety, but here are a few. So it not only provides feedback to the teacher on how they're doing, but the student as well. And it allows them both to see the student's needs and areas that they've already grown upon. It also helps us as educators set standards. It allows us to see where students have mastered performance standards, where we still need to work on and continue to grow. And it also evaluates progress. So It allows teachers to see where they need to modify their lesson plans, where they need to modify, maybe teach things using different learning strategies, etc. It also allows students to reflect on their progress. So they can demonstrate and talk about the content that they know. And it can also motivate students and teachers through the reflection and allowing them to see areas of growth and areas that are a challenge to them this far. And it can definitely help direct future learning as the educator. So some commonly used forms of assessment that through the research I've seen are effective would be self-assessment. This can be done through learning diaries, reflection logs, portfolios, interviewing. So this allows students to take ownership in their learning. Peer assessment is another one. You just need to make sure that the peer is going to be a valid source to ensure that peer assessment would work effectively. And it would allow students to demonstrate mastery of content. We have essays if you set clear expectations and use a rubric. This can definitely provide an effective source of assessment to enhance students' writing skills. And then lastly, which I believe most teachers use at some point, are exams. So they can, if the topic is set correctly, it can allow for deep learning and deep discovery versus just the surface learning and cramming. The ultimate goal with exams is to make sure you set the appropriate questions to allow for that deep learning to occur. Now we move to culturally responsive assessment. So to have culturally responsive assessment, it allows for students to draw connections between their learning and their direct daily experiences with the world, and treating those experiences as an asset in the classroom. All our students come from different backgrounds, and we need to use that as a resource, not a downfall. So we need to put students in the center of that learning. So to understand the student's background and their culture, and to use that and not use maybe a traditional assessment for one student versus another. And to scaffold during learning to allow those students to grow effectively. We can continue to collaborate not only with our colleagues, but the students' families to allow for that cultural responsive assessment. Examples of culturally responsive assessment would include rubrics for the families, maybe a questionnaire. Consider those students' home language. We will get into bilingual and ESL students here in a little bit, as well as write letters home in the home language so the teacher, so the parents can understand. Some of our families, they don't speak English. So when you send home a letter that's written in English, they rely on their child to read that to them. And that is definitely not creating that collaboration that we want between the teacher, the school, and the families at home. As well as culturally responsive, we want to create critical thinkers within the classroom and in society. So a student who not only masters material but has evaluated it for himself and comes to his own conclusions on it, and how it impacts his or her life, that is using critical thinking skills. So as of now, many teachers do not have their own critical thinking skills. So we need to train on that to allow for our students to become critical thinkers. Critical thinkers not only analyze their thinking, but they assess it and then to upgrade it as a result of that critical thinking. Standardized testing allows for very little of this, especially with socioeconomic disadvantaged students and the barriers that they face on a daily basis. They also use an inadequate sample of materials. So these are examples of why critical thinking, they say, is not used in standardized testing. And we don't also always include culturally responsive questions in that standardized testing. Those are some reasons that we are seeing a shift in standardized testing, which will continue, I believe, throughout the next decade. Some examples of critical thinking within the classroom. For ELA, instead of doing a, say, multiple choice or matching to explain character plot, students could draft an email to that character and discuss the plot with them. That would use critical thinking. As far as math goes, you want to think about the process to reach the final answer versus just the final answer in itself. So explaining why we reached the answer of 4 when we added 2 plus 2, not just 2 plus 2 is 4. That was creating critical thinkers in our classrooms. Section 2, we are going to avoid ineffective classrooms, and here are a few ways to do that. So there are many factors that we need to consider to avoid an effective classroom. We need to create a welcoming environment. We need to consider our students' socioeconomic backgrounds. We need to ability group when appropriate. We need to include diverse learning strategies to meet all of our students' needs. We need to use a various range of questioning techniques. And it also involves teamwork, not only with our colleagues, but with the students and their families. And finally, we do need to have that continuous interaction with parents and families. So to create that culturally responsive classroom, we need to consider, again, that socioeconomic background. We need to consider past educational experience, especially when these families move a lot. We also need to consider language barriers and choose the correct language to test students in. And when necessary, we need to translate from their language back from English. Examples of formative assessment that would work to be culturally responsive include choral responsive versus individualized within the classroom, so having the whole class answer together, and also providing glossaries and bilingual dictionaries for students that are ELA or bilingual. Section 3 is the well-being of our students. So I felt this was a powerful quote. Teachers are powerful figures in the lives of most children, and I think sometimes we tend to forget how much of an impact we do have on our students on the daily. So positive student well-being is broken into a few dimensions. So we have the social dimension, which is creating those positive relationships and a sense of belonging, as well as students and parent and their involvement and how it correlates with the student's life satisfaction. We have the psychological dimension, which kind of intertwines there a little bit, and in it reflects on students' self-awareness, their self-esteem and motivation, and how that affects their life satisfaction now and in the future. We have the cognitive dimension, which is creating those lifelong learners and effective workers, thinking critically, as well as their perception of testing. So the perception of testing can really affect students academically, and we need to make sure we're adapting and seeing testing to the students as not a high anxiety task to complete. Some other indicators that affect the well-being of our students is bullying. In some of the research, it suggested that 15% of students said that they were made fun of more than a few times a month, which is definitely saddening. So we want to keep our environment safe, and we need to promote safety, tolerance, and respect for all students, as well as creating that school community through effective training for our teachers, as well as how to handle bullying, and being sure that students know that we have a zero tolerance policy for bullying in the classroom and throughout the school community. Next, we have our board policies. So we have a range. I have them listed. A few of our academic board policies that I want to touch on are our non-discrimination within the classroom and our multiple cultural beliefs. We also have exemption policies for religious reasons. We have policy number 127, which is on assessment methods and how to accommodate families and students. We have a specific policy for migrant families and trauma and violence victims. As far as non-academic barriers, we have a policy on extracurricular activities.